Where are all the products? If AI is giving us 10 to 100x improvement in output, where is all this going? If we take a look here at the top GitHub repos, we have it marked as this year. This year is undoubtedly a good year for AI. And it's booming, man. It really is booming. If we look through this list, we can see at the very tippity top, of course, we have OpenClaw. This doesn't really count because a lot of these are what I would like to call hype stars. Unfortunately, I don't know when it happened, but probably at least 4 or 5 years ago. It's as egregious as a star for star. I've seen this where people are just straight starring repos for each other. And of course, you can buy stars online, I've heard. So what we're going to do here is we're going to scroll through this list until we find a single company that is not AI. So OpenClaw at number 1, I don't think that counts because it's very AI. Open code, I think you could argue, is a valid product, right? I would say this is the first valid non-hyped product that we've seen so far. As I mentioned how bad the stars are, you've got even GitHub repos that are literally just MD files. Like Andre Karpathy's skills do have to go a bit through the weeds here on these MD GitHub repos. Skills, G-Stack, which is Gary Tan's. A lot of junk, I ain't gonna lie to you. Here we go, Reveal. This sounds promising. Turns commodity Wi-Fi signals into real-time spatial intelligence. Okay, it looks kind of AI in terms of its marketing. Let's take a look. Review. Has anyone tried Review? This is pretty recent. It's a scam project. Pi is a good one. Pi I actually like, but I kind of would tie it into AI. And so we're down to 25 here. Unfortunately, I didn't see a single release that wasn't an MD slop or AI. And to be honest, I'm not sure how we could really track this. GitHub is just riddled with these MD file slops, skills for real engineers, right? Unfortunately, the way the stars work, it looks as though this is going to change your life. Anyway. And so the question becomes, right, are we overstating this statement here? The common statement we see is about its productivity improvements. And so while I do agree it improves our code output, I don't know if we can really say that translates to more products. So many variables that come into play. You got the definition of it. Sometimes you go through customers, marketing, direction. A big issue that we're seeing, yes, we do have these inputs, but we're putting it in the wrong place. Imagine you're getting an animal like this with all its speed, and you're wasting time having it chase after very small features and unrelevant features. This part, unfortunately, has actually gotten possibly worse. Really, with great power comes great responsibility. And when you're given at your fingertips something that can just spam out freaking 100x code, you're more likely to go down a path that you wouldn't have before, which can be good and could also be bad. And there's this tweet here from Mark Andreessen. He says, "We are so far from having the productivity boom that AI doomers and luddites worry about so much." Right? I think this affects both sides. I think people that are on the side of AI benefiting us. I've always felt the productivity claims that I see around are absolute absurd. I feel like there is a middle ground that people tend to not stand on, where they'll make it seem like it's just an all-around freaking massive 100x improvement, but they'll disregard everything else. And obviously it helps to do that. You can market it a lot better. Matt Pocock can't sell his skills if he doesn't sell you some value into it. I found this article from Forbes kind of pre-AI, right? December 2022, which I feel like this is a time period where AI might have been around, but it definitely wasn't at a state where you could just forget any kind of manual coding. You definitely needed some manual coding back in 2022. You know, it kind of gives a high level understanding of the time that goes into a product. As a client, you'd like to know the approximate date. As a software developer, time estimations help to accomplish the scope. And there's this part here, which I really think is actually almost negatively impacted by AI. It says, you know, the development time consists not only of the scope of work, but you should also consider risk buffers and time meters, both of which are hard to foresee and unable to control. Time meters can refer to communication issues between team members and people who are unable to work. Right? This really is still the case. Communication is still a part of the job as a software engineer for sure. And I think a big problem that I want to point out here is this idea of risk buffers. I feel as though now that we have these AI tools, we often underestimate the risk buffer part, right? Because it used to be a time where you knew you had to spend weeks to develop something. And in that case, dude, you're going to plan that thing out to a T, right? You're not going to risk starting a feature until you know the full scope because you know how much time goes into it. Whereas now in the post-AI era, because you know it could take sometimes, dude, as much as hours. Like there's genuinely things that took weeks before that takes hours. Now, obviously there's nuances to that, but when this is the reality, guess what? You don't really go through this stage anymore. And so kind of what I was alluding to earlier, where the question is are we going down the wrong paths? Because to be honest, pre-AI, right, whenever you're going down a path, you can think about how much time you're going to have to spend before you actually started going down that path. But now, dude, it's like you'll take a right turn and go straight into the desert because you know how little time it will take. In your mind, you tell yourself, oh, well, if it doesn't work, I'll just Control Z. But the problem with this thinking is that it compounds. Say this one time, and then you say it again, and then you say it again. And what you end up with is a mosh pit of ideas that you didn't really vet, which culminate into just a complete mess. And the thing about AI is, yeah, it does speed up our development, but this part here of decluttering is a pretty big problem, right? It costs a lot to build. It costs even more to fix. If you've ever tried to take an existing code base and rewrite it or make adjustments, I mean, assuming your code base is freaking 100,000 lines of code, you're spending a lot of money doing this part. And so as you've compound more and more bad ideas, you end up in this state, dude, where it's like, it's a hard thing to come through. And so if we look at the timelines that this article mentions, and remember, this is pre-AI, so this gives us a good understanding of kind of what was going in pre-AI. Requirements and design, 2 to 4 weeks. This stage includes drafting the system requirements, features, and the design of your future product, and prioritizing the development task. Through this phase, you should make all decisions to scope your budget and architecture and make a precise plan for your software product development. This part, although we have it here at the forefront, oftentimes this changes over time. So many times you end up in a case where what the customer wanted yesterday is not what they want today. So yes, this is 2 to 4 weeks, but this is the initial requirements gathering stage, right? And it's expected this is going to change throughout time. And then it goes into, planning, architecture, and development, 3 to 6 months. This part right here is what is massively impacted through AI. Ideally, I'll say this, ideally you're doing the planning and the architecture still at the same level, if not more. When you're given so much power at your fingertips and you know that you can just undo it so quickly, or at least in your head you think so, it's more likely, especially if you're inexperienced, you're going to end up in a case where you're just freaking hammering out features and you're not thinking about the long term. And you have to realize, right, your agents are just going to do whatever you tell them to do. Right? If these are all your agents, at the end of the day, they are not going to vet your idea against the whole system. And don't come and say like, oh, you could just use a Matt Pocock skill and that'll fix everything. Really, that is not going to solve the problem. As we know, AI is very much a yes man, and it still is. Ask a question to any of these LMs, or a common one you'll see is, you're right, yada, 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 yada. Even with the newest models, I find when it makes a mistake, I'll tell it the issue, and then it'll tell me, oh yeah, you're right, you're right. This part is just always going to be there, probably well into the future. And this is kind of the same as it was when we were pre-AI. The architects are the ones deciding things, and the engineers are the ones implementing them. At the end of the day, the engineers, they might push back here and there, but for the most part, they're just going to do what they're told. They're doing their job. But I think this is unfortunately negatively impacted because of how quick it is to go from planning and architecture straight to development. We end up in a case where this part is not as well flushed out as it could be. The article mentions the longest process is code writing. This part is obviously quite different in post-AI. I think we're often going down the wrong path. This is part of the bottleneck because it's so easy to go down these paths. There's this article here from Anti-Rez. I want to get his full name. I can't find his full name, and I record this in one take, so I won't read it all because I think it's a good read on your own time. And he really talks about controlling the ideas and not the code, as the title suggests. This is mostly harping on the discussion of whether or not you should read the code. But I really like how he described, my hands are free. You know what I would do instead? Use all the time that the review is taking me to do more QA, to think at the next optimization idea and apply it, and to use LMs to write a design MD file where each data structure is described in human language with the ideas it contains, the implementation tricks, and the design. And kind of what I was saying, how the article mentions the longest process is code writing. This is in 2022. I would say now, ideally, the longest process is in the planning. The working day is 8 hours. If you read the code, it is a trade-off. You're doing less of what today is the most important part of your job. That is asking yourself what I'm doing with this software. What are the new directions I want to take? And also think at new ideas, features, optimization tricks, and doing a lot of QA. So our mind really should be shifting away from the old process of code writing into the mindset of planning. But this is also oddly enough harder to do than ever before, because when you have so much power at your fingertips where you could just quickly do this, you really need self-control to prevent going down these loops here. But so if you view your day as an 8-hour working day and you say, hey, I'm going to spend, if you think about before, this 8-hour working day, you might have spent 4 to 6 hours coding and then 2 hours doing other shit. This is, assuming this is your most effective block of time in your day, it should now be shifting to 4 to 6 hours of prompting, but ideally this is being divvied up better, right? You're not just straight prompting out new features. You're allocating maybe 2 to 3 hours to plan and 1 to 2 hours to prompt. Now, obviously, this is very off the cuff. Ideally, you have planned out what you're going to do. We can work in parallel here. You can send the prompts and then also work on your plans for the next step. There's this really short article from Corey Leviska, and he references this tweet. He says, I've been spending a lot of time talking to experienced software engineers lately, and when you get in a one-on-one candid conversation, everyone is rather shell-shocked by how quickly and drastically things have changed. And it kind of goes into the idea of that we're building a lot more but not necessarily the right more. What I alluded to earlier, where it's like you could go down the wrong path. Really, it feels like that's what we're doing right now. It feels like everyone's just going down the path of least resistance. And I don't blame them, right? It's fun and it's exciting. Like, let's be honest, it's very exciting to see your ideas realized in a short period of time. I think we all agree that that's a very enjoyable thing. But again, it takes some restraint. Otherwise, you end up in a case where you're just building the wrong thing. There's a newer article from Forbes discussing the returns of AI, and it kind of harps on how a lot of companies are feeling pressured to integrate AI into their workflows. Into the idea of like, did we really need this? Just because AI takes one scenario and amplifies it, does that mean it's also going to amplify another scenario? Or is it possible that that's actually going to hinder that scenario? I'd like to think AI can help pretty much everything, but the level of which it helps definitely is differing. And so just because you see a tech company going all in on AI does not necessarily mean an operations company or a supply company would want to do the same thing. And you could attribute this to a lot of things, right? Layoff pressures. If you need to lay a bunch of people off, what are you going to do? You're going to go with the easy answer and say, oh, it was because of AI. And guess what? When you say this, you now need to follow it up with, we're integrating AI. Or you can't just say that you laid a bunch of people off because of AI and not also deliver on some AI incorporation. And so you have some of those cases of companies doing that. And this article does mention, right, even in this case, there is an efficiency improvement for sure, but that doesn't necessarily translate to cost savings. Right, as much as we love AI, and I do believe AI will hopefully, as we go on, get cheaper. Companies lose a lot of money in training, and hopefully the day will come where they stop spending so much. Also with, competition being around, at least for a certain class of models, tokens and in and out costs is not going to go up. I think there will be a bang for the buck model that allows pretty much every scenario to benefit more than they're spending. A model today, what are you going to use? You're going to use Codex, you're going to use Fable, or I guess this would be GPT 5.6 now. You do see, these are the non-bang for bucks, right? These are the workhorses, I guess, if you want to call it that, right? Grok has a new model out. Muse Spark is looking good. And so these types of models are what you're likely going to see benefit cases like this, where efficiency improvements are expensive, and so you need to stick to these cheaper models. Even with this, it's not exactly free, right? Tokens aren't free, and they never will be. And there's a lot of arguments you can make, like, oh, well, if we spend $1,000 on tokens, we save more than $1,000 in man hours. And so it becomes a tokens versus man hours discussion. And yeah, I think that's a good argument to make, but at the end of the day, the point is this doesn't apply everywhere. Tech company, I could see this making sense. But in scenarios where it's like few and far between, to really get benefit, you need to make sure the tokens are very, very cheap, which, man, let's be honest, it's not going to be dirt cheap anytime soon. And so closing thoughts for this, it feels as though we're putting our it feels as though we're putting our efforts into the wrong place because of how easy it is. When you know how low effort it is to incorporate something, you're more likely to do it. And what you end up with is a compound of a bunch of bad products. Right? Envision this as being a contaminated piece of filling, and it's like you're going donut by donut, filling it up. By the time you reach to the end of the line, it's too late. And so what do? You throw the project out, start over, and then you do it again. Fortunately, a lot of people don't learn from this, right? They continue to do the mindset of prompt first, think second. But that's why we are in a situation, I believe, today, where it's like, dude, we have 100x efficiency improvements, but we really don't have 100x product output. I think it'll change, hopefully. I think ideally we truly view ourselves as architects, where before we even begin to prompt, we've already thought out exactly how things are going to go. We've already defined like a clear roadmap of exit criteria even, right? And you can do this. You can define exit criteria for each stage of your product, but most people don't do this, right? They start off here and they're just vibing their entire way through. But I feel like if you had, exit A, exit B, exit C, and you defined exit criteria at each of these with like clearly defined features, I feel like if you adopt this mindset, you run less risk of going in the case where you're just prompting and ending up in a mosh pit of Control-Z-able ideas that lead to no products coming out. I don't know. I'm tired of seeing calculator apps and fitness calorie tracking apps. I'm ready for a revolution where we actually see some crazy, interesting products coming out, and I hope that changes soon.